Good afternoon, everyone. Bill Cannon from Police Off the Cuff. Every day that I wake up, I always check out if there's any new developments in the Nancy Guthrie case. And as we know, it's over 3 months, over 100 days. And so far, there really hasn't been. Although every single day someone puts out there, breaking news, breaking news. There's nothing breaking right now. And the nature of investigation is that you have to keep working. You have to keep your nose to the grindstone, keep taking calls, keep investigating tips, working on digital evidence, working on forensic evidence. And in this case, it seems like the biggest hope they have is DNA, an investigative genetic genealogical DNA, which could take 6 months to a year.
He walked up to her front door in the middle of the day, reached up with his left hand, and covered the camera lens. Then he walked inside. 100 days later, that man's face is still a ghost. The one piece of evidence that should have solved this case within 48 hours has been broadcast on every screen in America, and yet nobody has come forward to give him a name. Not a co-worker, not a neighbor, not a family member. That silence is not a dead end. That silence is the loudest clue in this entire investigation. And if you have been following this case waiting for the breakthrough that the news keeps promising, but never delivers, I need you to understand something I did not fully appreciate myself until now. I told you science would solve this. I told you the DNA would speak. But I did not tell you how long science takes when the crime scene is a home full of innocent people's genetic material, when the suspect had no reason to be in a database, and when the one man we can all see with our own eyes apparently exists in a world without anyone who will acknowledge knowing him.
And it's not for a lack of trying, right? His picture's been out everywhere, right? On the news, on flyers, local news, national news, international news. It's been published. And yet, we don't know who that person is. And that is the kidnapper. That is absolutely the kidnapper. And then we have all the theories that can either help or hurt this case, right? And some of the best profilers on this earth, no doubt, Jim Clemente, who I've had on my show, former FBI agent, right, one of the best profilers in the world, he predicted that that person caught on video was the lone kidnapper.
That was my gap, and today I am going to close it, because the absence of an identification is not a failure of the public. It is a window into exactly who this man is. When a suspect's image goes viral and no tip arrives, experienced investigators stop asking why nobody called and start asking what kind of person generates that result. A random stranger, a drifter passing through town, a transient with no local ties. Those are exactly the people who get identified fastest because they stand out. Somebody remembers the guy at the gas station. Somebody's doorbell camera caught him walking a street he had no business walking. But when a man moves through a neighborhood without drawing attention, when his presence does not register as unusual, that tells you something. It tells you he belonged there. It tells you his face was already familiar. And when that same man reaches directly for the one camera that could capture his approach and covers it with practiced precision, you are no longer looking at a random predator. You are looking at someone who had been to that house before. Someone who knew the camera's exact position. Someone Nancy Guthrie herself might have recognized the moment she opened the door.
That tried to cover up the Ring camera. He knew where the Ring camera was. Some things are baffling about this. And you listen to Dr. Gary Brucato, who has another theory, and a great, great scientist, a great forensic psychologist, right? A great clinical psychologist. He believes that Nancy Guthrie was taken before out of that home and was kidnapped and murdered at some other location. These are his words. And that the crime scene was staged to make it look like it occurred in the house.
That is not speculation. That is a behavioral indicator, an observable action statistically inconsistent with how an innocent person approaches a home.
From day one, that the person that is responsible, person or persons, I think it's persons. I don't think it's a person. I think there's more than one person. And I think this person, these persons, let's put it that way, had cased the location, Had Bill been familiar with the location, knew who Nancy Guthrie was, had maybe been in her home before, had maybe worked for her, or a friend or relative worked for her, and knew that there was some money to be had here. And we could get into it and argue over the fact, was this ever a kidnapping? Or was this a random burglary slash home invasion? I don't believe that. I believe it was planned. I believe that the person that entered the home that tried to cover up the ring camera, he knew where the ring camera was. Some things are baffling about this.
An innocent person rings the bell. An innocent person does not disable surveillance before entering. Now watch what happens next on that footage. He enters through the front door, but investigators found two separate entrances at the back of the house propped open. Two exits prepared in advance. Why? Because one person does not need two escape routes. Because one person controlling a struggling adult woman cannot simultaneously prop doors, navigate hallways, and avoid leaving a trail that ends on the front step with blood. That blood belonged to Nancy Guthrie, and it was not staged. The pattern, the volume, the placement on the doorstep, it tells a story of a violent moment that occurred right there, not somewhere else. Profilers with impressive credentials have argued otherwise, and I respect their work, but I have spent 27 years walking crime scenes, and when you see blood on an exit path, you do not need a dissertation to know the violence happened at that threshold, which means Nancy was conscious, bleeding and being moved. One man could not have done that alone and left the scene as clean as he did. The second set of hands never appeared on camera. That person knew the blind spots. That person knew the back door. That person may have been inside the house before Nancy ever came home. Let me give you something I have not seen discussed anywhere else. Something that has been hiding in plain sight in the evidence inventory released to the press. The mixed DNA profiles recovered from the scene have been described as a complicating factor, and they are.
So all of those things we suggested. But again, now, and as I said, this case will be solved by science. The investigators recovered multiple DNA connected to the scene, but reports indicate some of that evidence involved mixed DNA profiles, meaning several individuals' genetic material may have been combined together. Contrary to television portrayals, that can significantly complicate laboratory analysis. In a lived-in residence, investigators have to separate innocent DNA from potentially incriminating DNA. Family members, visitors, medical personnel, maintenance workers, delivery drivers all become part of the elimination process. But again, how do you know a maintenance worker isn't the perp? You don't. So they got to be careful with all of that. Whose DNA is the perpetrator? Who is involved in this? So we can't just eliminate it. Just, in a crime scene, you would have elimination fingerprints. So you would fingerprint everyone that had permission and or authority to be at that location. But in this case, a little more complicated because it involves the DNA.
But mixed profiles are not just noise. They are a map of who was present. Family members, visitors, delivery drivers, medical personnel, maintenance workers, all of them leave traces that must be eliminated through what investigators call the elimination process. Here is what the news has not told you. When you run elimination samples, you compare known individuals to the crime scene mixture and you subtract them out. What remains is the unknown contributor, the profile that belongs to no one who had permission to be there. And if the genealogical work currently underway at the FBI lab in Quantico and the private lab in Miami is targeting the right profile, then somewhere in that data is a name that will crack this case wide open. CODIS, the National DNA Database, will not find it because this man has never been arrested. But genealogical DNA testing does not need his arrest record. It needs a second cousin who took an ancestry test. It needs a distant relative who never imagined their family tree would lead investigators to a kidnapper. That work takes 6 months, sometimes a year, and every day that passes without a match is a day that brings us closer to one, because the databases grow constantly. The process does not stop. The science does not sleep.
Doesn't necessarily mean that that's the person they're looking for. What's baffling to me and everyone that follows this case, anyone that's ever worked a homicide case, anyone that's ever strapped a gun to their right or left side of their body and called themselves the popo, police or detective or investigator, what's baffling is that the person caught on that ring camera that we had early on in this investigation is still not identified. It is so baffling to me that that person has not been identified.
Now I want you to think about that 1.2 million reward sitting untouched. In a legitimate kidnapping, the kidnappers initiate contact, they make demands, they negotiate, they give proof of life. None of that happened here in any verifiable way. Early on, a few ransom notes surfaced through media intermediaries, notes that Savannah Guthrie herself said might have been legitimate, but she could not be sure, and then the communication stopped. Kidnappers do not go silent when there is 1.2 million waiting for them unless one of two things is true. Either they never intended to collect a ransom, because the kidnapping was a cover for something else, or they knew the moment they took her that no negotiation was possible, because she had already seen their faces.
So he believes it was done by one person, and that's the person you see on camera. I disagree with him because I think that to have controlled Nancy Guthrie,
She knew them, and that made her the one thing no kidnapper can afford, a witness who could identify them the instant she was released. That is not a random home invasion. That is a targeted elimination of a threat, dressed up to look like an abduction, and it worked for over 100 days because the public has been waiting for kidnappers who were never going to call.
and that the crime scene was staged to make it look like it occurred in the house. I don't believe him either. I don't. Well, you outstanding profilers, thank you so much for your theories, but I'm not buying that. And how about the fact that there's $1.2 million in the kitty right now as a reward to pay the kidnappers? But that seemed to get confusing right from the very beginning, right? Usually, if there is a legit kidnapping, the kidnappers correspond with the family members of the kidnapping victim. And then the family contacts the police or the FBI, and they're being told what to say and what to do. They're not going to just take it upon themselves to negotiate with these kidnappers, right?
I can hear the counterargument forming in your mind, because it is the same one Jim Clemente, a profiler I genuinely respect, has made publicly.
And he based that on the fact that he did a big sort of dissertation on the blood spatter evidence that was on the front doorstep of Nancy Guthrie's home. I do not agree with him, and I have no credentials whatsoever to being a profiler or that type or amount of education in processing of evidence. However, I did 27 years in the NYPD.
He says one kidnapper did this because there is no physical evidence of a second person. No second set of fingerprints on the door handles. No second shoe print in the blood. It is a clean argument, and I understand why it appeals to people who trust forensic science. But let me man the opposition properly and then show you why it collapses. Forensic evidence tells you what was left behind, not what was present.
To have controlled Nancy Guthrie, he would have had to, and again, I don't understand why they left through the front door. And the blood evidence on the front doorstep would seem to indicate that. Yet, two entrances in the back of the house were propped open. So why didn't they just leave that way and walk around the side of the house? I guess maybe it was too long a walk or too long for the kidnapper or kidnappers to take Nancy Guthrie in from that route. And then the fact that Jim Clemente said one of the kidnapper, because he says it's one kidnapper, struck Nancy Guthrie. And that's what caused the blood, the bleeding from the nose, the coughing, and the blood spatter on that step.
A second person wearing gloves leaves no fingerprints. A second person who stayed on the clean tile and never stepped in the blood leaves no shoe prints. A second person who entered and exited through the back, who never touched the front door or the camera, leaves no trace that survives in a home already saturated with the DNA and prints of dozens of people. The absence of evidence is not evidence of absence, and when you pair the physical impossibility of one person controlling Nancy, bleeding through the front door while two back exits stand propped open, the lone kidnapper theory stops looking like a parsimonious conclusion and starts looking like a refusal to see the obvious.
I don't know. I think that it's a stretch. It's a stretch. So there's two famous profilers: Jim Clemente, former FBI agent, head writer on Criminal Minds on TV, great guy, very educated. He also has a law degree. All these guys just happen to pop off a law degree along the career, and that's amazing to me. And then Dr. Gary Brucato, who believes that this was a staged kidnapping and she was murdered someplace else. And what would the motive for that be? And he has a whole theory on that also. He believes that the kidnapper or kidnappers were targeting Savannah Guthrie, and they got back at her through murdering her mother. And over 100 days right now, 3 months or more.
There were two people. The man on camera is the one they wanted us to see. The one we never saw is the one who planned it. So where does that leave us, 100 days later? With a sheriff who tells the public we are getting closer while offering no specific evidence that anything has changed. Sheriff Nanos has no business running this investigation. And the local politicians who referred complaints about him to the state attorney general, rather than taking action themselves, know it.
However, I did 27 years on the NYPD, 16 years in the Detective Bureau. So I know how to run an investigation. I also know how to investigate, and I have great gut instincts. And is a lot of police work gut instincts? You bet. And that's what's surely lacking a lot in this case. And again, we always get on the subject of Sheriff Nanos. He should be gone. He should have nothing to do with this case anymore. And it's disturbing to me that the local politicians, after they did a little inquest on him, referred it to another agency, like state attorney generals. Are you kidding me? Take action at the local level. Get rid of him. He's not doing a good job. He couldn't find a bad guy in a state prison, but yet they didn't get rid of him. And so do you think that hampers the FBI in helping? Because the FBI is not going to catch this case. They're not going to be in charge of this case. They're going to work in tandem with the Pima County Sheriff's Office. And who's ever in charge at that level is calling the shots. Unfortunately, the person calling the shots is not a good investigator, does not do a good job with this case.
The FBI is assisting, but they do not have the lead. The Pima County Sheriff's Office calls the shots, and the person calling those shots is not an investigator. He is a politician managing a crisis he does not understand. I have said it before and I will say it again. He should be gone. This case needs fresh eyes, fresh command, and a lead agency that knows how to coordinate a multi-jurisdictional forensic investigation without leaking false promises to the press every time a reporter asks for an update.
I will give you the definition of a cold case. A case is cold when all leads are exhausted. Okay, that's it. Simple. All leads are exhausted. Then it's a cold case. So till that happens, till law enforcement tells you that, just zip it, because it gets annoying to hear you always saying that, right? This case definitely was not viewed as random. Sheriff Nanos indicated investigators believe the suspect, of course, had a specific target in mind. We talked about that. That suggests preparation, familiarity with the victim's routine, and possibly prior surveillance of the residence. Reports now indicate investigators believe the suspect may have been near the home weeks before the abduction itself.
Here is what I need from you. The man on that ring camera is wearing a specific backpack, a specific mask, carrying a specific holstered firearm. Look at the image again, not the face that you cannot see, the gear, the way he stands, the way his left hand reaches up while his right stays at his side. If you have ever worked a job where people carry similar equipment, if you have ever seen that posture, that particular way of moving, I want you to describe it in the comments. Do not guess at a name. Do not post accusations. I am asking you to notice what you noticed. You are not a bystander in this case. You are the reason missing persons get found and unidentified suspects get named, because the collective memory of people who pay attention is more powerful than any database. Your observation could be the thread that pulls this entire thing apart.
And so what else could make it shift rapidly? A tip that gives a name of someone that looks exactly like the person in the video. The masked person with the backpack, wearing a mask and carrying a firearm. If that person can be identified as a tip, that could also crack this case wide open.
This investigation will end the way I told you it would. The DNA has been collected. The profiles are being built. The cell tower data from the days and weeks before the abduction is being analyzed, and tower dumps do not lie about which devices were near that home and when.
That's important. Experienced investigators know criminals who prepare for crimes often leave traces during the preparation stage, right? A vehicle appears repeatedly in the neighborhood. A suspicious person is seen walking the area. Digital evidence begins to form a pattern. Cell phone pings, traffic cameras, business surveillance systems, toll readers, all these things become part of the investigative puzzle. But so far, over 100 days into this case, we have no digital evidence or no evidence that we know of very specific vehicles or individuals that had been in this area prior to the abduction of Nancy Guthrie.
The genealogical tree is growing branch by branch, and eventually it will produce a name.
And for each sample of DNA, they may have to do a family tree, an investigative genealogical tree to determine who that DNA belongs to. So this case has never been easy from minute one. Today, forensic genealogy has transformed homicide and cold case investigations, even if a suspect has never been arrested and has no profile in CODIS. That's the combined DNA identification system run by the FBI. Investigators may still identify relatives through genealogical databases and begin constructing family trees. The Golden State Killer investigation proved how powerful that strategy can become. If investigators obtain a viable DNA profile in this case, the entire direction of the investigation could shift rapidly.
I do not know when that moment arrives. I will not pretend that I do. But I can tell you with absolute certainty that the evidence in this case is not weak. It is not ambiguous. It is waiting, and when the last piece falls into place, you will hear it here first, not in a breathless headline with sirens behind it, but in a calm, complete account of how the investigation finally caught the man who thought he could cover a camera and disappear.
And every day someone claims, breaking news, cracked open and it's just complete nonsense, complete bullshit. I almost don't even watch it anymore when someone says, "I'm breaking the case," because there's so many. It's like the boy who cried wolf. Remember that story, guys? The boy who cried wolf. And after a while, no one believed him anymore because he kept doing all those false alarms. That's what the national media is like. Breaking case. And nothing.
He was wrong, and we are not going anywhere.